Legend has it that Alexander the Great entered the city of Gordian and was shown a chariot, which was tied by a knot thought impossible to untie. Alexander didn't waste a moment on trying to unravel the knot. Instead, he took out his sword and simply cut right through it. The public education system in many ways resembles this Gordian knot, except for the fact that there's no really easy way to just slash through it. And so public education has become what sociologists call a wicked problem. We're Natalie and Monica, and today on Unbreakable, we're talking about how the wicked problem of public education is affecting our children. Are there any solutions? Let's see where the truth leads us today. We have lots of problems in public education, more than meets the eye. However, things are bubbling over right now.
So we have what we call a wicked problem, much like the Gordian knot. It's always shifting. The goalposts are always shifting. It's not a fully solvable problem. It's too complicated. It's got too many competing interests. No one can really be held accountable for the problems that are perpetuated by it. And there's no real ending point. It's unsustainable, it's all-consuming, and it's self-destructing. So how do you solve a wicked problem? You mentioned that you can't just, like the Gordian knot, you can't just cut right through it necessarily because it is so big and so all-consuming.
Oh, I don't even know. I don't even know where you begin. I know we've tried. I know in the work we've done on public education, we have tried to address problems that parents have brought to us, you especially being on the board, are approached by parents on a daily basis with problem after problem after problem. And there are no new problems. These are just recycled problems, right?
Right. Parents are consistently running up against the wall when trying to address these problems. And we talked about in previous episodes, they get the lip service, they get the runaround. Parents quickly become frustrated and they either pull their kids out or they give up and just let the system take over, thinking that they have no other options.
It's interesting because we have people who've worked in education, John Taylor Gatto, Frank Smith, Charlotte Iserby, Erica Carl. These are voices that range way back to the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and they've all sounded the alarm on what public education was designed to do, which was to train up children to be compliant, collectivist and secularist participants in the state's social and economic goals. And they wanted really these goals to be achieved by, here, we're going to change your values, we're going to change your behaviors. And they've been experimenting on the kids in this psychosocial realm for decades now. And then we have tech and AI, and they've come in and they've accelerated these goals exponentially. And so you combine this with our globalist social value systems that are being implemented in the schools, and I don't think there's any other word for it but evil.
That they're training our minds to think like they do, to think like they want us to, so that we'll just go along with their plan of control. And this wicked problem is built on systems that they've created that spawn other systems that are interwoven that keep us stuck in the system and in the problem, so that individual thinkers cannot break free from that.
Yeah, the problem is that state takeover of your life, your life and of your children's lives.
Well, what good is the Constitution if we're stuck in systems that have other rules that don't allow us to exercise our constitutional freedoms when we're in those systems?
Yes. Yeah. No, it's a huge problem. We have competing values going on right now and competing ideas of how these values must be passed down to the upcoming generations. So let's talk about the first characteristic of a wicked problem, which is, in a wicked problem, the problem is always shifting. So when they're moving the goalposts, how do they do it? What's one of the first ways they move the goalposts and they keep you off your balance?
The policymakers, the lawmakers, they get to define language, right? It used to be that we all worked off the same dictionary. We had common definitions, and now laws and policies create their own definitions, so you can have competing definitions. So you've got different definitions, you've got different interpretations of those definitions, and therefore different ways of implementing those laws and policies that are created. Oftentimes the language is subverted by the time it gets to the end of the row where it's implemented, so that it ends up doing the opposite.
Well, we've seen that, haven't we? We've seen that through
again.
so many things. For instance, in education, some of the jargon includes phrases like student agency. And that's a word where you learn and you think, okay, agency means your freedom to choose freely. And it's not what it means according to the system. It means here, you get a limited number of choices. And then we continue to narrow down those choices while making you feel as if you have choice.
Along with the highly variable interpretations of the laws and policies, the language, you'll never have enough laws to rein in those that want to subvert the laws, right? Yeah. There's always a loophole. There's always a creative way around, even if that means they have to redefine the words as they go. So you have dynamically shifting language.
That's hard. It's like living in the Tower of Babel, right? Uh-huh. Yeah, we are using the same words, but not necessarily speaking the same language. And so you're talking across each other. You're not even on what they like to say common ground, but you're not even there.
No. Well, when you said student agency, really what they're doing is turning students into agents of the state. Mm-hmm. Students that know how to regurgitate the state's talking points, the state's goals and ambitions, and they're graded based on how well they fulfill those goals of the state that they think are their own goals. They're made to believe are their own goals. So, yeah. But really everything is, and everyone is just perpetuating the state system. Okay, so also with the rules and the policies, rules are made for rule keepers. And yet we have a society full of rule breakers, and those can be good or bad people, right? It depends on the rule. Is it a good rule? And that goes back to the lawmakers or the policy makers. Are they making good rules or laws, or are they making self-serving rules and laws that benefit them and benefit their system? If that's the case, then, rule breakers are a good thing in a system that is trying to control and remove freedom and liberty.
Oh, sure, because the selective and the subjective interpretation and the enforcement of these rules, that's entirely left up to the administrative state. That's the bureaucrats. Right. And they'll enforce it where it suits their needs. They'll look the other way when it doesn't. It's one of these things that we've seen happen time and time again at the board, haven't we? Mm-hmm. Board members who will bring up, oh, well, we don't really like that language, but we'll leave it in. And I think they're signaling at that point that this is language that can be ignored. Nobody's really going to bring the hammer right. down on teachers or principals or anybody who chooses to look the other way on it.
Right. Or they'll simply crosswalk it. Yeah. Which is redefining it incrementally through application and how they're going to interpret it and implement it. So
yes, that's a big one.
But you also have, people within the system that if a good law is passed, will simply break it because their goal is to push forward the agenda. They know that chances of them getting in trouble for breaking what is truly a good law is very slim if their breaking of that rule helps forward the overall agenda.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've seen that again.
They'll have cover for breaking the law.
Yeah.
And once in a while, one of their hands might get slapped, so it looks like they're trying to enforce, but usually there's very little enforcement, and it may just be a slap on the hand, and then they go back to doing what they're doing once the public feels satisfied that something was done to rein it in when the problem continues to exist.
Yeah. So we've also seen shifting priorities or shifting language when it comes to For instance, the board's strategic plan. This one was a really interesting one. We saw the board recently go back, and when we say the board, we're talking about the Utah State Board of Education, which is the 15-member body that has the general control and supervision over all public schools, K through 12, in the state of Utah. And so here's the board. And they just recently came up with a new mission, a new vision, and they said this will affect our strategic plan, and they have all this lofty language, but they have all this new language in the vision and the mission, but the strategic plan basically essentially remains the same.
Well, and the strategic plan, if it hasn't changed, or if it has changed, the implementation hasn't.
Right.
And I had a conversation with the state superintendent at our last meeting, just a side conversation. I said, has anything actually changed as far as how staff runs things and all of their programs and agendas based on the board changing their vision and mission statement? And she said, no, nothing's had to change. We haven't had to change anything.
Right. So it feels like you've just been faked out.
Yeah.
Like, oh, we're moving this way, but really we're still going in the same direction that we were before. Not much has changed. And
I gave a whole public comment or board member comment on the layers and layers of redundancy within our strategic plan and that our staff is working 24/7. I mean, they're the full-time staff, almost 300, almost 400 staff members that work full-time to implement a strategic plan. The board debates the language of the strategic plan, and it's basically a simple framework, but then it's in the layers where all of the national and global agendas are pulled in by staff to flesh out that strategic plan. And the board doesn't have any say.
And those
in what those layers are, and they can change all the time. They're constantly changing, and so the staff is there, no matter if board members come and go, the staff stays there, and the agenda continues to roll forward. Whoever is elected.
Right. Okay. So, what is the purpose of school? That's another shift. That's always shifting. Is it academics? Is it to shape moral character? Is it mental health? Is it to provide for students' basic needs? I think for a lot of us, we would just love it if education would hold still, sit in its seat, and just focus on academics. Start there, start fresh, and then maybe we can just peel back all this craziness that we're seeing where you're not even sure what you're sending your kid to school for anymore because they're telling you it's a half a dozen things all the time.
Right? Well, if you were to do that, and just go back to focusing on objective academics, straightforward math, English literature. If you were to go back to that, think how many jobs would go away. Mm-hmm. And the system would say, oh, we can't do that because, all of these people depend on these programs, or these programs are dependent on all of these people. And so a lot of the reason why I say this is they bring in these programs to justify hiring more and more people, which is growing the state.
Right. And who's going to push back at that point? Because at that point, you have the state as a major employer. Yeah. That's our economy right now that is resting on how we choose to educate our children. And if we can expand, if we can shift the mission of the schools, we are shifting the economy in the same breath. It's it's a little bit worrisome that my kids' education is what they are basing all these jobs on.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and you think about the saying, if you build it, they will come.
Yeah.
Right. They are building out this behemoth system. They're adding systems upon systems to make schools everything for everyone. And when that happens, those programs or those people are going to fulfill their jobs in order to justify their positions, mm-hmm. right? So the perfect example is when they introduced DEI or equity offices within schools, which they've tried to push back a little bit on, but that was just morphed. The language, they still have those things, they just call them something different. But when they brought them in first to say, we got to root out racism, right? Everyone thinks, oh, that sounds great. We don't want racism in our schools. But the problem is that where there wasn't racism, they were now finding it because their jobs depended on them finding it.
Yes.
Okay, it's the same thing for social workers. They're like, oh, our kids are suffering from mental health problems. We need more school counselors. We need more social workers, more school psychologists, more this, more that. Well, as soon as you bring them in, guess what? They're going to find more and more mental health problems in order to justify keeping those positions.
Yes.
And so it will never get better. Those problems will only ever get worse.
Right. And so here we have an education system that is really, in the words of James, 1:8, we have a double-minded system, or a double-minded man, and it's unstable in all its ways. And so to move on to the second category of this wicked problem, a wicked problem also is not fully solvable. This isn't something you can just easily jump into and solve. Solving one problem actually spawns multiple more problems, and that's the deep irony of it.
Well, because if you want to solve a problem, they come up with a solution. And the solutions that the state presents spawn more problems.
Yeah, they never actually solve the problem that they are created to solve. And that's the crux of it, is just that the solutions create more problems. It's like you mentioned before, it's like layering the systems on. But everybody knows, it's almost like, think about like putting on your makeup and you get something wrong, right? And imagine just putting on more makeup and more makeup and more makeup, instead of just kind of wiping away the makeup that went wrong in the first place. It just... We never do that. We just add more layers and more layers until it's almost clown-like.
It's super clown-like.
Yeah.
A wicked clown.
A wicked clown.
The kind nightmares are made of.
Right? Yeah. Spooky clown. Okay, so you have behavioral and discipline plans, which I think are that perfect example of the solution never solves what it says it's solving. We want kids to behave better in school, or at least to not act out, to not hurt other students, etc. But yet they institute restorative justice. And restorative justice doesn't actually restore justice, it creates more injustices.
Right, yeah. It's an unjust program to begin with, right from the root. If you understand what restorative justice is, it's like reparations.
Yeah,
it's treating somebody as it's throwing blame on somebody that isn't to blame, which is going to create resentment and frustration, and that they're going to act out more, or they're going to take the abuse and never stand up for themselves. They're going to be conditioned to just accept the system running roughshod over them, which is not a good thing either.
Right. And we've seen it. I remember when I was approached by members of the Tooele Juvenile Justice Court who were saying that the offenders, because they belong to some kind of historically disadvantaged population, when you had a kid who acted out, who hurt another kid who was actually bullying them, that offender was treated with kid gloves because, they may have suffered some sort of inequity historically in the past because of their color, because of their ethnicity, because of their gender.
Student themselves, but somebody before them.
Yeah, well, even assuming that the student may have too, right? I mean, there are so many assumptions that go into it. And they think, well, because the student belongs to this disadvantaged category, that they may not have had all the advantages this other student that they're picking on has. And so let's treat them differently. Let's not cast blame. Let's let them hug it out.
Right. So the abused has to sit down with their abuser.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's a super awkward thing. I don't want to say, seriously, you don't want to sit down with somebody that's abused you.
No.
And suffer more abuse.
No. It's fundamentally unfair. It's unjust, and yet they call it restorative justice. And then they do the same with PBIS, which is positive behavioral intervention systems. So when a kid is acting out, what they'll do is actually reward the kid.
Or, bribe them.
Bribe them. They'll bribe them. Oh, you don't want to be acting out. You're disturbing the class. Go talk to the principal and then come back with a candy bar.
Right. Well, any good parent knows that that you will get more of what you reward.
Yes.
Right? If a kid acts out and they get rewarded for it, they're going to do it more. Or if you're trying to incentivize good behavior, you're not going to be able to get that good behavior unless you give them a reward for it, instead of letting kids experience the intrinsic reward of doing good for the sake of good.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So, when we have the solution creating more of the problem, we see that in things like mental health initiatives. This is almost all they talk about in the schools nowadays, right?
Oh, yeah. Like Jordan School District, they came out with their calendar for mental health, and for October, every day they have something for mental health on their calendar, whether it's mindfulness, every single day. It's like, okay, our schools are now officially mental institutions. I don't want to say mental health institutions. That's what that's how they want to frame it. But they are acting as if every child has mental illness. And by focusing on that assumption, they are going to create mental illness in every child.
Right.
Because you can if you go live in an insane asylum, how long are you going to last before it starts affecting you and you start feeling kind of insane, right? So kids are going to school now, and with this huge push for mental health or a focus on trauma, every kid has trauma, and we have to treat them or educate them based on, trauma-informed care. Kids are going to start feeling like something's wrong with them if nothing's wrong with them. And so they will adopt problems. They'll create them in their own minds in order to not stand out as, well, what's wrong with you? Like, what's your problem? I don't have a problem.
Right. Well,
they don't want to do that because kids want to fit in. So if everybody has a problem, they want a problem too, so they don't feel like the odd one out.
Right. Well, and it's attention seeking too when a lot of these kids act out, or when a problem manifests in their behavior. They a lot of times get sent to now what are called wellness rooms.
Or they can take themselves there.
Or
so it's an easy way out of class.
Yeah, they can just go sit in the wellness room where they get one-on-one attention, or they can just check out or do whatever. I'm not quite sure.
Read books. I've heard of wellness rooms with bean bags and video games, and it just sounds like, like the social hall at a college or something.
Yeah.
Like the hangout lounge.
Yeah. So, you get more of what you subsidize, and that's kind of sad, but that's what we're seeing. And, let's talk about the complex nature of public education. What's very interesting, that's the third part of a wicked problem. How many people are involved in running the public education system? And it's not just people on the payroll. Then you factor in volunteers, you factor in those who want to shift and change policies, and then you factor in all the policies. I think our state edu code is just hundreds of pages. It's so long.
Well, and those all come from stakeholders in the education realm, meaning it could be nonprofit organizations, it could be non-governmental or government agencies, or unions, or global entities. All the alphabet acronyms, right? Of these different agencies. Everybody wants a piece of that pie because it either they gain political power or profit, or there's some kind of ulterior motive other than purely in it to help children become academically educated.
Yes, and we'll talk about that on the area of too many competing interests. But, in terms of complexity, it's not just the people and it's not just the policies, but you have procedures. We have a lot of tech that makes things harder. I remember seeing the frustration in my own children's faces and hearing it in their voices when they were asked to do an assignment and they had to read it on their Chromebooks, and then they had to highlight specific spots on it on the Chromebook. It just seemed like so many steps to do something that they could more simply do on paper and with pencil. And as we've gotten away from paper and pencil and actual physical books, everything is like 5 steps for what used to take 1 step.
Yeah, it's super cumbersome.
Yeah.
And it slows down the learning process and you know, putting those stumbling blocks in the way. It breaks up your person, an individual's flow of thought.
Oh my goodness. Yes. It totally breaks up your flow of thought. Like, what interest do you even have in doing this assignment after it's taken you 15 minutes to get logged in and to find out where it is and to make sure that, okay, I'm drawing the slope of this math problem properly on my Chromebook. I just knew my children were so frustrated. And I know so many parents who feel the same.
Right. Well, and so that just adds an extra layer of complication that doesn't need to be there.
No. But yet at the same time, somebody's job somewhere depends on your kid using a learning management system.
Well, and it speaks to that system of control, and they have to be able to track everything. So that's why they want everything and surveil the students. So everything has to be done on tech so that they can measure learning. Mm-hmm. Well, learning is not meant to be measured in that kind of way. I mean, you mentioned once to me, at some point, you know, the system wants to take credit for everything everybody learns, right? If they're not teaching something, they want to take credit for what a child or an individual would learn naturally. So, and make standards for it so that they can measure if those standards are being met. So if a child goes to school starting, you know, if they can move the system to bring children in at younger and younger ages, at some point in the future, we may look back and wonder how or believe that the system, our children could not learn to walk if they didn't go to school.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That is really true. And if you think about how they treat reading, which is a natural process, 95% of kids would learn how to read normally if you just read normally with them. But we don't read normally with them. We have to hire 5 outside vendors to come in and implement an early reading program online. They sit there and they go through. It's just, sorry, I'm just going to cry. It's so mind-numbing. It's so awful, the programs that they have these kids go through in order to learn how to read. It's so boring. It's beyond boring. They give them these boring stories. They give them these boring, very routine, say this word 25 times. Oh, you got it right. Yay, a little fox shows up on the screen and does a dance. And that's supposed to be the reward for your kid reading the word fox.
It's simply programming children through reward and punishment for every little thing that they would normally learn naturally without all of these impediments. And the tech becomes an impediment to learning and is part of what makes learning way more complicated than it needs to be. Things that would happen naturally, just person to person, especially one-on-one. So again, I go back to why homeschooling is so superior. Because that child gets one-on-one attention without all of the impediments in the way. But the state, if they have any say in it, they will stick those impediments between you and your child. Even as homeschoolers, they're going to try to find a way to get the impediment in between in order to complicate what should happen naturally.
Yes, absolutely. So let's talk about too many competing interests in this wicked problem. And you mentioned before, we have all these outside organizations, an alphabet soup. Like, how many acronyms are there for all these different organizations, all these different political affiliations, these non-governmental organizations, these nonprofits, for-profits, foundations, committees, councils? I remember one time, we started listing them. I think the the font point was something like 5-point font. And we did 4 columns going across the page. And I think that was just the beginning. Like we could do that for days.
Right. People ask us all the time, who's the they? You say they are doing this. Well, that was our attempt at writing out all the theys. There's so many that it's just easier to say they. We'll have to put that document out there so everyone can see who all the theys are. But it's always growing and it's always morphing, and we're always learning about new groups. And I think they literally want the village to raise the child.
Oh, that not only do they want it, they've mandated it. Yeah. In state code.
They're already doing it.
Yeah. They're already doing it, and they're doing it to this insane level where the people who are making these crucial decisions for your children are 6, 7, 8 degrees removed from the classroom. They don't know what your child looks like except as a data point.
Right.
Or as a dollar sign. There is almost zero personal connection going on there. And why would you want there to be one anyway? I don't know these people. I didn't elect these people. I can't go visit them or ask them, why did you choose this horrible reading selection for my child?
Right. Well, and most teachers, to be honest, don't have a clue that this is how it's set up either. So, I'm not casting blame on them because they're just doing what they were trained to do. They go to the teacher colleges, they're indoctrinated into this is how it's done. You don't ask why, this is best practices, this is evidence-based. Well, who decided that this was evidence-based and best practice? That's the question that should be being asked. And then that question allows you to start peeling back the layers and finding out who is behind all of this complexity and getting in the way of the parent and child relationship, the teacher and the student relationship, that's creating, getting in there where it should just be the parent, the teacher, and the child working together with the preference on what the parent wants and needs for their child, knowing that the parent knows best. But not in a nanny state, not in a complex system like this where it's compulsory, and the teacher and the parents don't have a choice. They're being graded and evaluated on how well they comply with the system, just like their child is being trained to and graded on how well they comply.
And teachers are required to bring out extra support systems into teaching the children. And so support personnel, you have, I don't know how many different specialists are in the education realm at this point. And I remember speaking to some of them when I was running for office, and even they would tell me, our jobs are really frustrating because it feels like we are brought in to solve problems that really could be solved maybe at some other level, but they're not. So we have too many competing interests. And then, of course, nobody is really held accountable in this wicked problem of public education. Nobody.
Well, and how would you put the blame on anybody when everybody is trying to do what somebody else told them to do, but everybody has a different interpretation of it?
Yeah.
And there's always another layer that they can point to say, I'm just doing what I was told.
I remember when my children had learned that their pronouns were being asked for on Canvas, which is the learning management system for Granite School District. And I wanted to know who was responsible for making this decision to allow the kids to toggle their pronouns on their profile. And so I called the district, and I'm told by the instructional director there that, he made the decision in consultation with so many district personnel, including the superintendent. So I say, okay, and I call the superintendent and I ask him, who's responsible for this decision, wondering what he would tell me. And he told me the state board was to blame. Oh, the state board is to blame. They're the ones that we contract with to use the learning management system, Canvas. It's all the state board's fault. Well, what is it? What's the truth? your own employee told me you helped make that decision in consultation with your staff.
Right. It's the D's, right? Deflect. What are the others?
Deny.
Deny.
Right.
There's several different strategies that they have, and
Distract.
It's almost like they're trained to try all of these different methods. If one doesn't work, then try the other. But eventually, a parent gets worn down and gives up. And
right. And if you don't already have the answer yourself, you almost have to know the answers before you ask the questions,
or know the answer before, in order to know what question to ask.
Yes. It's super sad that way. But yeah, nobody is really held accountable in this. And then, of course, there's no ending point. The system is so large. It is so all-encompassing. It's designed to be so immersive that there's really no escape from it. How many events do you see that are planned through the school system, or how many services and supports do you see that are available through the school system that just keep reaching out? You get emails, you get texts. Oh, your kids are going home for the summer? No, they're not. They can come to the school and still pick up a school lunch.
Quality summer program, or or the school will bring them a lunch.
Yes.
Right? We have to make sure that everybody's fed. The school does everything for everybody. That's to gain the loyalty, right? And to create dependency on the system, because they don't ever want anybody out of the system. They want you totally dependent on the system. And even when kids graduate, they are creating a pipeline that has no gaps. They don't want any gaps. A seamless pipeline that keeps kids in the system, whether they go to college, whether they go into teaching and go right back to the K-12 schools to teach, whether they are enrolled in a work-based or project-based program, a CTE program. Everything is designed, these career pathways, to keep everybody in the system forever. Yes. So that you're totally dependent on the system to know what to think, what to do. It reminds me, I mean, this is October, and, you know, back in the day of the reformers, right? The Tyndales and the Luthers and all of these individuals, Joan of Arc, that spoke out against the tyranny that was put on them in order to keep them from thinking and believing and worshiping according to their own conscience, right? And if they spoke out, they were killed. They were literally killed because the system had to protect itself. They had to protect their own power. And so they couldn't have people speaking in opposition to what the system was trying to inculcate in everybody.
Sure. Those who challenge the system become a threat to it. We've seen that time and time again. Nothing has changed because the system exists to perpetuate the system and to make sure that anybody who challenges the system becomes ineffective, right? Neutralized. And even more so, I think they tried to discredit people who offer up a question or who don't quite accept the answer that they are being given, whether it's about your kid's homework, whether it's about a program, or whether, I mean, how many times have we seen this happen with parents, right, who are made to feel like they are in the wrong for simply asking a question.
Right. Well, and if it goes back to the carrots and sticks. If you go along with the agenda and you adopt their language and you perpetuate it and you protect it, then they will privilege you. They will give you benefits. They will give you access to services. And they're creating a system and they're expanding it out, not just in the schools, but throughout society, that if you want access to just normal, regular services and products and travel and whatever it might be that we just take for granted, if you don't go along with this system they're putting in place, you will no longer have access. You will be cut off. That's like the social credit scores and the surveillance state, 15-minute cities. All of these things are an extension of what's happening in the schools that are designed to keep everybody in check.
Yes, invested. Yeah. And so there are no checks and balances. There are only blank checks, essentially, given to the school system. And what's interesting, too, is that, we've often compared education to a tsunami. And tsunamis create these whirlpool effects, right? Where you get kind of sucked down and you just kind of keep spinning. And with no off-ramp in sight, it's very hard when you've been brought up in a system that claims to be the everything for you. It's the beginning, it's the alpha, it's the omega. And I feel like that's one of the counterfeits, right, of this awful turn that education has taken in our society.
The system will save you, the message.
Yes, the system will save you. It is, you have to essentially think inside this mindset that the system has created for you, even from before you ever stepped a foot inside it. And it's very comprehensive. But in being so, it's going to eventually, I would say, suffer underneath the weight of its own hugeness. It's too large.
Like The Blob, the movie The Blob, where it just takes over the whole city and consumes everything within its path. Yeah. And yet, but it's unsustainable. Like, once it takes over everything, what's left?
Right. Once it takes, you're left with a very large jail cell, essentially, right? And that's not where we want our kids to end up. That's not where we want to end up as adults. We want them to be able to have that capacity to create their own paths, make their own decisions, forge their own way through life, and not have to go through the scripted process that the schools have created for them. I want my kids to be able to act on inspiration. I want them to be able to say, hey, my conscience says this is not a good thing to do. And then to be able to act on it without fear of what the system might do to them in retaliation for acting on that.
Yes. Yeah. But we have to have a generation of adults and children that understand that basic concept of liberty and that recognize when something is presented to them that is a counterfeit of, because the system uses all of the liberty sounding language. They wrap it up in all of these wonderful terms in order to deceive and make people think that this is my path to freedom, my path to success. This is how I'm guaranteed a good outcome if I just follow this plan that they've laid out for me. No, that's how they keep you in their controlled system. Only God can lead you to liberty. And that requires us to be in tune with Him and acting on our conscience and not violating our conscience, because every time we violate our conscience, we become less able to receive or hear that divine inspiration that will lead us to true liberty and out of the grasp of this system that is all consuming, or this infinity loop that keeps us kind of just running in this path where we think we're getting somewhere, but we're really not.
Right. And when the snake swallows its own tail, as this system really is set up to do, that is a very narrow, such a limited outlook on life. And our kids deserve so much more. And I love that juxtaposition of, what's the solution to a wicked problem? It's God.
Yeah. You got to break out. And that's by following God. And even, I've been reading a wonderful book called The Heavenly Man, about a Christian convert in communist China. And even when he was locked up in the prison camps, and there's many stories like this, he said, my spirit was free. My body was in bondage behind bars, and I was whipped and beaten and starved and all kinds of horrific things. But he said, God strengthened and supported me, and He let my spirit soar, and my spirit got stronger and stronger as my body got weaker and weaker. Meaning our mind is, and our soul is the last frontier. That is what they're trying to capture with these kids, and programming their minds so that they don't think about God. They don't know how to think outside the box. It all starts there in the mind. And if they can program the child's mind to think only in that very limited way, then they don't even have to capture them physically and put them behind bars or in a concentration camp if they can capture them mentally and emotionally. So there are all kinds of, there's different versions of bondage. And we want our children to be free intellectually, spiritually, emotionally, physically. We want freedom in all aspects, in all realms, and the system is designed to absorb all of those.
Yeah, it really is.
The scriptures are a great resource for helping us break out of the state's mindset.
Yes. And we want that for all our kids. Mm-hmm. Before we wrap up, we'd like to thank you for joining us again on Unbreakable Truth in Education. Please subscribe to our channel on the We Are the People network. You can watch our shows on YouTube and on Rumble. And if you want to check out some of the research that Natalie and I have been doing, please go to higherground.work or check out our channels on YouTube and on X, which are at Higher Ground UT.
The wicked problem of education is wicked simply because there are no easy solutions. Parents have come to me for years with problems that are just symptoms of larger problems. Complaining parents come and go. Kids get older and move on to different grades, different schools, but the system remains in place. Like Alexander, more of us need to be willing to search for solutions outside the system and be willing to take unconventional approaches, and some of those will not be easy. As Thomas Sowell has said, there are no solutions, only trade-offs. And as I have said many times, if parents don't sacrifice for their children, they will end up sacrificing their children. Time is short. Our kids are counting on us to, like Alexander the Great, think outside the box and act boldly and decisively for them. Helping children and families find truth to become unbreakable, we are Natalie and Monica. We'll see you next time.